Hello and Happy New Year. Welcome back to Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily, the heavyweight podcast that gives you everything you need to know about the day ahead in British politics in under 20 minutes. Objectively heavyweight, only because I've looked at the scales post-Christmas.
Good morning. It is Monday, January the 6th, 2025. My name is Jack Blanchard of Politico. With me, you can hear a slightly heavier Sam Coates of Sky News, and MPs will soon be pouring back into Westminster this Monday lunchtime after the long Christmas break, while the Prime Minister this morning kicks off the new political season in Surrey, of all places, giving a speech that is most definitely not another relaunch. Definitely not, Sam. No chance.
I have to say, Jack, I hope our political masters and overlords enjoyed the break, because in public, it wasn't a festive season where they covered themselves in glory. I don't know whether you agree. The current Tory leader, Kemi Badenoch, well, she picked a fight with Nigel Farage over membership numbers, memorably declaring she was watching his back end and lost. Nigel Farage tried to duck a fight with Elon Musk and also lost, and that failed spectacularly yesterday. Meanwhile, Keir Starmer, and I have to say, this was the saddest political story of the entire festive season, finally went on holiday, but ended up being jeered for jumping the queue for a downhill toboggan ride in Madeira, where he was with his kids. And he only did it because local security told him that he wasn't allowed to stay in line for an hour. And he didn't even get to go on the toboggan himself. He was only delivering his kids to the front of the queue. But the crowd still cut up rough, according to the Times, generating all sorts of awful headlines. The Spectator churned out, Starmer's queue-cutting blunder shows he's not very good at politics. I'm not sure it was his Phil and Holly moment, but I came as close as I can get to feeling sympathy for him.
They do say being Prime Minister is a lot harder than it looks, Sam. If you can't even go on holiday without getting jeered by the crowd, it's a pretty rough business, this one, isn't it? Poor old Keir. Let's run you guys through the week first, tell you what's happening in this first week back before we get into the day ahead. Monday today, as I mentioned, Parliament is back today after its 2 or 3 week break, and Keir Starmer is making a big speech on the NHS at what Downing Street are calling a healthcare setting. Those are the two main things today.
Deputy Prime Minister tomorrow, Angela Rayner, is doing her first big select committee hearing. She'll be asked about the kind of planning changes and those housing targets, 1.5 million houses by the end of the Parliament, which even she says is quite stretching.
Wednesday, we'll see the first Prime Minister's questions of the year. Keir Starmer taking on Kemi Badenoch, as you say, plenty to talk about after their various issues and furores that happened over Christmas and New Year. And the author of the last big inquiry into social care, Andrew Dilnot, is before the Health and Social Care Committee. Longer in the tooth listeners will recall that he did a big report for previous government on how we should reform the social care system. That report has been sitting gathering dust in Whitehall for the last 10 or 15 years.
I do wonder whether the government's big announcement on another social care review last Friday was all because they could see Andrew Dilnot appearing before this select committee this week. Anyway, on Friday, well, that's a big moment. Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, goes to China, accompanied by the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey. Is this the end of Securonomics if we're going to China in order to ask them to make our electric cars and our batteries for all sorts of net zero compliant goods? We'll wait and see. Friday's a date for the diary because it's the day by which some local authorities have to say whether or not they're going to effectively self-abolish and become part of unitary council. So the government's undertaking a massive review of local government. Some councils are going to change. They're no longer going to be district councils and county councils. We're going to turn into one single unitary authority. Why that particularly matters for now is that councils that are doing that aren't going to hold elections this May. And that looks like it's going to shape up and cause an awfully big stink. So at some point after Friday, we'll find out which of the councils, which then won't go to the ballot box, almost certainly calling cries of foul play, particularly from Reform and Nigel Farage's party.
All right, let's talk about the day ahead in British politics. Now, Parliament will be back this afternoon. They'll be sitting at 2:30, but while we're waiting for that to happen, Keir Starmer has grabbed the Monday morning slot to make a big speech. as Downing Street will put it, on the NHS. And that's because NHS England is publishing what it's calling its elective reform plan at 11 o'clock this morning, which will set out some of the first details on how Labour is going to hit some of its key NHS targets. So ahead of that, Starmer, West Street and the Health Secretary, the NHS boss, Amanda Pritchard, will all be together making a speech, or Starmer will be making a speech at 10 o'clock in the morning. There will be a big Q&A with the media as well. Sam, do you want to just talk us through broadly what they're saying on the NHS here? Is this actually new policy that we're getting today? Because there's been a sort of various flurry of announcements on the NHS over the last few months. Is this actually saying something new today, or just small details, do you think?
What Keir Starmer is going to announce is a focus on the 7.5 million backlog of treatments that the NHS need to do. That was the number of the size of the backlog at the end of October. There are 6.3 million people waiting on the waiting list for those 7.5 million treatments. And in order to sort of plough through this, you're going to hear a lot today about community diagnostic centres undertaking a lot of this treatment. Now, it's important to say these CDCs, they are not new. In fact, there were press releases all the way through Rishi Sunak's time in power about how there were going to be 140 of them pretty much up and running by this March. I think we're on track for that. So the centres, these community centres themselves, they are a consequence of the last government. What is new is that Keir Starmer is going to say that they're going to operate for 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. So that's going to require a big splurge of cash. That's cash, not new money from the Treasury, but from within the 22 billion a year that Rachel Reeves gave them in the budget. And GPs are going to be able to refer people directly to these centres for a small number of conditions, to cut out consultants who previously were another layer that you had to sort of set of hoops that you had to jump through. And in order to encourage GPs to do that, GPs are going to be given more cash if they kind of streamline the process and go through this and jump through this new hoop. So quite a lot of money below the surface is being splashed around, but the government don't want to talk about the financial bit. They want to talk about the consequence, which they say is hundreds of thousands of new appointments by forcing these CDCs to work at a faster pace. And they're setting themselves a new interim target of the proportion of treatments that need to be seen within 18 weeks that will come into force next year. So giving themselves a little bit of a hurdle to jump over. So that's the sort of outline of it. Alongside it, a number of related announcements about giving people more choice through the NHS app. People will be given a choice of up to 5 hospitals where they can seek treatment, potentially including some private hospitals. Quite how that meshes with the plan to get community diagnostic centres doing the treatment is not quite clear yet. A lot of the detail will be in the document. This government has become quite adept at cherry-picking a few examples from a much bigger plan, the rosiest, sexiest examples, but it does actually sort of getting the coverage out before people get a chance to look at the bigger documents that are published alongside the announcements, where the kind of fuller, more complex picture, often with some nasties, is unveiled.
Yeah, you mentioned pulling out the sexiest bits. My concern for Keir Starmer here is this really sexy enough? Every focus group and poll will tell you that people are very worried about the NHS, and improving the NHS is one of most people's top priorities for the country, and so it makes perfect sense for Labour to be pushing hard on this. Is this sort of thing really going to cut through with people, though, and going to change their minds about this government? From a political point of view, I'm not sure that the sort of language around it, Sam, about the plan for change and the 18-week standard for planned treatment and the elective reform plan are the sorts of buzz phrases, if I can call them that, buried in the 1,800-word press release that Downing Street put out about this. It's all quite deep and techy. Now, if people feel, start to see these community centres, in their local area, they start to feel they're getting much better treatment on the NHS and getting it locally, then of course that will hopefully, the government would think, hopefully filter through, and people start to feel positive about the government. But the backdrop to this is, I think we have to just say, the extraordinary unpopularity of this government appears to be bedding in. We've been doing this podcast every day since the general election, and at first there was an initial backlash against Keir Starmer in the autumn, that is very much now set in stone. If you look at, every poll rating that Labour are getting is so negative. And if you look at the historical context of this, I was reading a really interesting piece by Rob Ford, the pollster, saying that, the unpopularity of Labour right now is on a historic scale for a new government. The only one that comes close is John Major's government after the ERM disaster, and of course he never recovered from that and got absolutely hammered in the next election. That is the sort of scale of unpopularity that Keir Starmer is facing. And I think the danger for Labour as we go into the new year is that people are getting a fixed idea about this government, and once people have made up their minds, and of course most people only engage with politics very briefly in their day and then get on with their lives, then there's no coming back from that. And I just fear that if this is your big relaunch plan for the start of the year, as I say, the focus on the NHS makes sense to me, but the sort of language they're using, is this really going to grab the headlines? Is this really going to be the thing, Sam, that people are even talking about by the end of Keir Starmer's press conference this morning? Because what we should say is that there are many other things that Keir Starmer is going to be asked about today, and the fear for Labour must be that the NHS is not even the top headline at the end of this event, given the various other things that people are going to want to talk to the Prime Minister about.
One more thought on the complexity of this. Keir Starmer has decided to focus on the backlog for the NHS. A lot of people experience the NHS through A&E, and there are incredibly gruesome and worsening stats, not least in The Guardian this morning, about how longer waits in ambulances for people who have got to A&E but haven't been admitted to hospital are causing serious harm, and those figures are on the rise even over the last 12 months. So people do have to feel the NHS is getting better in order to believe the rhetoric. Will that happen, particularly given the government is focusing on one bit, the backlog, rather than other bits? But you mentioned distractions. And of course, we're referring here to the story that dominates most of the front pages this morning, which is Elon Musk's absolute determination. What are we? 15 days before Donald Trump becomes president of the United States and Musk himself enters the new US administration, to stick his oar into British politics. I was just scrolling back last night through Elon Musk's Twitter feed over the last 12 to 15 hours. And not only are you struck by the sheer volume of somebody who is effectively joining the US government within weeks, but just how often he's commenting on different bits of UK politics. And really, kind of everybody is getting hooked into the Musk psychodrama, because he is just churning out view after view on, most notably yesterday, this spectacular two-footed tackle against the person that we thought was his biggest UK ally, Nigel Farage. So on Saturday, Nigel Farage gives an interview to the BBC, effectively defending Elon Musk's comments about grooming gangs, and Jess Phillips, the safeguarding minister, who Elon Musk says should take, and this is incredible, Tommy Robinson's place in jail. There's Nigel Farage defending the right to free speech, even if he doesn't agree with it, on Saturday. And apparently even that enrages Elon Musk to the extent that yesterday Elon Musk demanded that Nigel Farage be replaced as the head of Reform UK, because he just isn't up to it, and spends the rest of the day pointing to other members of Reform UK's small group of MPs and suggesting that maybe they would be better. All of this sort of drawing the UK further into the US political psychodrama as we approach Trump's arrival in the White House.
Sam, even in the last hour, Elon Musk is at it again. I mean, the guy is absolutely obsessing over this. I don't know how he has time to run all his different businesses. In the last hour, he's called for Keir Starmer to go to prison on his Twitter feed. That is the British Prime Minister now, he's saying, should be in prison over his supposed failure to be tougher on these grooming gangs when he was chief prosecutor back in the noughties. How much of a problem is this going to be for Keir Starmer once the new Donald Trump regime comes in? As you say, 2 weeks today will be the inauguration, and at that point Elon Musk becomes, in a sense, a member of the government, although it's a bit of a strange role that Elon Musk has actually been given. You know, his role as heading up this so-called Department of Government Efficiency. It's not a real government department. He's essentially going to be an advisor to the Donald Trump cabinet on how, and make suggestions on how they cut what he would see as a government waste and too much spending. But of course, even that isn't in the hands of Donald Trump. It's Congress that decides how much government spends. So Elon Musk has a bit of a strange role, and it's not clear to me at this stage whether he is going to be permitted to just carry on freelancing in this way and calling out America's major allies and saying that their leaders should be in prison. That's not what you'd expect a member of the American government to be doing. But Elon Musk is going to have this slightly side role, and it's hard to imagine anybody reining him in. And therefore, you would imagine this sort of thing is probably going to continue once Donald Trump is president. It's going to be very interesting to see how other members of Donald Trump's administration, the more mainstream ones, feel about Elon Musk doing this. And it's going to be very interesting to see, frankly, how Keir Starmer responds to someone who is a very close ally of the incoming US president, literally saying he should be in jail to his 200 million, I don't know how many billion people read his tweets these days, but it's a lot of people.
Until now, the approach, the considered approach of Keir Starmer's government has been not to engage directly with Elon Musk, sort of go toe-to-toe. You could see Wes Streeting's frustration at the amount of questioning about Elon Musk yesterday on the Sunday shows, suggesting that the media were going too far on this. But the bottom line is that they've tried very hard not to engage. I think the hope had been that it does die down after Donald Trump gets in the White House. But I think that there was quite an ominous sign for the UK government more broadly in US politics, which was the extent to which clearly Elon Musk is prepared to ignore the directions and the views of other people in Trump's orbit. There was a big row over Christmas to do with visas, and a lot of Trump's other supporters were calling for a clampdown. Musk was calling for an expansion, and he just went toe-to-toe with all of Trump's other allies to make a series of demands. Elon Musk is quite prepared to ignore other people around Donald Trump, even if they want him to shut up on foreign affairs, because we are heading to a situation, as Patrick McGrath was writing on Friday in the Times, that you've got Elon Musk actively supporting Reform UK in Britain, the AfD in Germany, and generally stirring the pot all over, you know, with America's biggest allies. And I think all of that is not going to go down well with people like the incoming Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, Scott Bessent, who's going to take control at the Treasury, and Michael Waltz, the National Security Advisor, all of whom will see, you know, UK-US relations, amongst other things, very much as their job.
Yeah, my sort of assumption had always been that it's hard to see the Musk-Trump relationship lasting for too long, given how tempestuous these two figures are. And I suspect the Labour government will be rather hoping that it doesn't last very much longer and then there is some sort of blow-up, because Elon Musk clearly a law unto himself and has a very, very noisy pulpit from which he can speak and to which everyone finds themselves forced to listen. Keir Starmer will certainly be asked about those tweets when he does his press conference this morning. He'll also be asked about the grooming gangs issue, Sam, which has dominated a lot of the political discourse over the last few days. Do you think actually this is a political problem for him? He's going to be forced to defend his record as the chief prosecutor. He's going to be forced to defend the actions of his government, of course, not having another public inquiry into this, given that we sort of had one a few years ago. Do you think he's got a political problem here, or do you think it's mainly social media noise?
I think that Keir Starmer thinks he's got a perfectly good story to tell about his time as, you know, Director of Public Prosecutions. He did sort of seize this subject in October 2012, said a generation of girls have been betrayed by the justice system's flaws. He ordered a restructuring of the CPS as a response to sex grooming, and hundreds of members of sex gangs across the country were convicted of crimes. There are individual cases from 2008 and 2009 that the CPS chose not to prosecute. Keir Starmer's office say those cases didn't reach him. Some of this will be picked over, I'm sure, in fine detail. What's fascinating, though, is that this whole news cycle about grooming gangs hinged on a letter that was talked about last week from Jess Phillips saying there'd be no national inquiry. that she wrote and published on October the 24th. It was simply a combination of a GB News scoop last week and social media that really got this story up and running. And I think the ability of some of Keir Starmer's enemies to dominate the news cycle with allegations about him and him being unable to shut stuff down, well, we'll see how well he does today, is interesting. But the letter from Jess Phillips that sparked this entire thing was not published last week. It was published in mid-October and just resurfaced and has dominated for days and days. And being able to shut stuff down is proving very difficult for Keir Starmer.
There you go. Well, let's see how he manages to fare this morning. Let's see if he can keep the conversation fixed on his plan for the NHS, or whether we end up spending the whole day talking about Elon Musk and all the rest of it once again. Sam, that's 20 minutes. We better wrap it up there, hadn't we? Very nice to see you. I hope you had a lovely Christmas break. It'd be nice to see you in person at some point. And we'll do it all again tomorrow.
See you then.